Aha! Somewhere in a room you've never been to, a group of people who don't use their real names are sitting around a table. They have files. They have data. They have months, maybe years, of observation logged in systems that technically don't exist, and they are quiet. Not the quiet of people who found nothing, the quiet of people who found too much. One of them, let's call him the analyst, because that's what he is, that's what he was trained to be. Pattern recognition, behavioral mapping, psychological profiling at a level that would make most people's heads swim. He slides a folder across the table, doesn't say anything, just slides it. The general on the other side opens it, reads the first page, reads it again, closes it, and says, "Nothing." That silence in that room, that silence is about you. They built a program. One of those quiet, well-funded programs that governments and institutions and the kinds of organizations that don't put their logos on buildings build when they realize something is happening in the population that they don't have a framework for yet. The program had one objective: find people who operate the way you operate. Study them, replicate the pattern. Train 100 agents to think like you think, move like you move. See the world through the lens you see it through. Every single one quit. And before you dismiss that, before your mind reaches for the comfortable explanation, understand this. These were not ordinary people they recruited. Let's back up. Let's paint the full picture, because you deserve to understand the scope of what triggered this. The program wasn't launched because of something dramatic. There was no single event, no explosion, no headline, no moment of public spectacle that put you on a radar. That's not how these things work. These people don't respond to drama. Drama is easy. Drama is manageable. Drama has a script. What they respond to is patterns. Quiet, consistent, impossible patterns. They had been watching a specific type of individual for years, not watching in the way surveillance works. Cameras, digital footprints, phone records, watching in the way serious researchers watch something they can't explain. With a combination of professional discipline and barely concealed unease, the behavioral analyst, let's call her Dr. Vance, because she has a name even if we don't know it, because she is a real person sitting in a real chair, sweating under fluorescent lights, trying to explain something her entire career said wasn't possible. Dr. Vance had been tracking what she called outlier decision nodes. People who, when placed inside complex, high-pressure, rapidly evolving situations, made the right call. Not sometimes, not usually, consistently. With a precision that, when she ran it against probability models, kept returning results that the software flagged as errors. The software wasn't wrong. She ran the models again and again. Called in a statistician who looked at the numbers and said, quietly, carefully, "This is not a distribution that occurs in nature, and yet, here you are." The general they assigned to oversee the replication program, 23 years of service, decorated, experienced, a man who had seen things in theaters of conflict that would rewrite most people's understanding of human behavior. He reviewed the dossier on the outlier profile and made a comment that got logged in the meeting notes. He said, "We're not dealing with training. We're dealing with architecture." He meant your mind. He meant the structure of how you process, respond, adapt, and move through the world isn't something that was taught, it was built, or it built itself, or, and this is the part that unsettles people like him, it was always there, waiting for the conditions that would force it to surface. They recruited 100 agents to replicate the profile, hand-selected, top percentile performers, people who had already demonstrated exceptional capacity in their respective fields. They weren't looking for average people to build up. They were looking for already extraordinary people to push further. They gave them the behavioral models, the cognitive frameworks, the decision architectures pulled directly from studying how you move. 6 weeks in, the first group started reporting something unusual. Not failure, something harder to quantify than failure. They described a kind of cognitive friction, a resistance, like trying to run software on hardware it wasn't designed for. The patterns they were being trained to replicate kept colliding with something fundamental in how they were wired. By week 8, the dropout rate was accelerating. By week 12, every single one had walked away. Some filed formal withdrawal requests, clean, professional, documented. Some just stopped showing up. 2 of them, and this is in the notes, this is logged, requested psychological evaluation. Not because they were struggling with the training, but because the training had shown them something about themselves they weren't prepared to see. It showed them the distance between who they were and who you are. And they couldn't close it, not with discipline, not with effort, not with any tool in the program's arsenal, because what you have cannot be installed. Now we need to talk about why that matters. Not to you. You already know something has always been different. You've known since you were young enough to notice that you were noticing things others weren't. You filed that away. You learned to be careful with it. We'll get to that. Right now, we need to talk about why it matters to them. The system. And when I say the system, I'm not speaking in abstractions. I'm not gesturing vaguely at some shadowy conspiracy. I mean every structure, every hierarchy, every institution that has ever benefited from the belief that human potential is evenly distributed and centrally manageable. The military-industrial architecture, the academic credentialing machine, the corporate ladder, the social permission structure that decides who gets to be taken seriously, who gets to be heard, who gets to be considered dangerous. All of it. Every brick of it is built on one foundational assumption. That capability is a resource that can be manufactured. If you want soldiers, you train soldiers. If you want analysts, you train analysts. If you want leaders, you put people through leadership programs. The whole system is a factory. And factories need to believe that given the right inputs, they can produce the right outputs. You broke that assumption, not on purpose, not as an act of rebellion. You didn't walk into their headquarters and file a formal complaint. You just existed. You just moved through the world the way you move through the world. And in doing so, you demonstrated something their entire architecture is designed to deny, that some configurations of human consciousness cannot be produced, only born, or more precisely, only emerged through specific pressures, specific experiences, specific years of operating in conditions that would have collapsed most people. Something was forged in you, not trained into you, forged. The way extreme heat and pressure don't teach metal to be strong. They reveal whether the metal was always capable of it. You were always capable of it. And that is an existential threat to everything they've built. Because if they admit you exist, if they formally acknowledge that there is a category of human cognition and capacity that their systems cannot replicate, they have to answer the next question. What is the point of the system? If power doesn't come from their programs, if clarity doesn't come from their credentials, if presence and precision and the ability to see through complexity and move through chaos with that particular quality you move with cannot be installed via their processes, then what exactly are they selling? What exactly have they always been selling? That question is more dangerous to them than any weapon, and you are the question. walking around in plain sight, being answered every single day just by being yourself. Let's talk about what they actually found when they studied the profile. When they pulled apart the behavioral data and tried to map the specific qualities they were seeing, the first thing they documented was your pattern recognition, not intelligence. They have tests for intelligence, metrics for intelligence, ways to measure and categorize intelligence that keep it safely inside their framework. This wasn't that. This was something that operates below the level of conscious analysis. You walk into a room and you know things, not in a vague, impressionistic way, in a precise, specific, actionable way. The dynamic between two people you've just met, the fault line in an argument that hasn't happened yet, the decision that's already been made in a negotiation that's supposedly still open, you know. They brought in computational systems to try to model this. State-of-the-art pattern recognition algorithms trained on massive data sets. They fed these systems the same inputs you're given, the same social scenarios, the same behavioral cues, the same environmental data. The machines got it right maybe 60–70% of the time on a good run. You operated at a level that made 60% look like blindness, and they couldn't figure out which data you were processing, because it wasn't just the obvious signals, it was the micro signals, the half-second delay before an answer, the way someone's weight shifts when a topic changes, the temperature of a silence, the specific frequency of a laugh that means something different from the frequency of a laugh that means what it appears to mean. You read these the way other people read words on a page. Effortlessly, automatically, at a speed that precedes thought. Dr. Vance wrote in her notes, "Subject does not appear to analyze the environment. Subject appears to be the environment." The second thing they documented was your timing. There is a quality in how you move, when you speak and when you don't, when you act and when you wait, when you step forward and when you disappear, that operates on a rhythm they kept trying to reverse engineer. They thought it was calculation. They assumed you were running some kind of internal clock, processing optimal moments to engage. So they started timing you, logging the intervals, looking for the algorithm. There wasn't one. Or rather, the algorithm was so deeply embedded, so fully integrated into your moment-to-moment perception that it had ceased to be a process and become an instinct. You didn't decide to move at the right moment. You were incapable of moving at the wrong one. And this is the part that made the statistician go quiet. This timing wasn't just effective in calm, controlled situations. It got sharper under pressure. The more chaotic the environment, the more precise your intervals became. Normal human performance degrades under pressure. The research on this is exhaustive, unambiguous, replicated thousands of times across every domain, yours inverted. Chaos was not your enemy. Chaos was your sharpening stone. The third thing was your presence, not charisma. Charisma is a performance, and they could measure performances. They had scales for it, training programs for it, a whole industry dedicated to producing it. This was something else. When you entered a situation, the situation changed, not because you said anything, not because you performed anything. The energy, and I'm using that word with full scientific intention, because energy is a measurable quality, not a mystical concept. The actual measurable quality of an environment shifted in response to your arrival. People became more careful, more honest in many cases, more aware of themselves, as if your presence activated something in them, some dormant capacity for self-assessment that the comfortable noise of their usual environment kept suppressed. Some found this liberating, some found it deeply uncomfortable. All of them noticed it, even the ones who tried not to. They brought people into controlled environments with you and without you, measured the quality of decisions made, the honesty of communication, the clarity of outcomes. The numbers weren't subtle. Every environment you were part of performed at a categorically higher level. The fourth thing, and this is the one that finally made the general close the folder, was your resilience. Not endurance, not toughness, not the grinding, jaw-clenched, white-knuckle resistance to pain that training programs are very good at producing. Something quieter. Something that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Because you didn't fight the things that tried to break you. You absorbed them. You took the impact, integrated it, and emerged on the other side, not merely intact, but fundamentally reorganized around whatever the experience revealed. As if damage wasn't damage for you, but information. As if every fracture became a new load-bearing structure. The analyst who wrote the final resilience report included one line that got highlighted by everyone who read it. He wrote, "Standard subjects recover from adversity. This profile metabolizes it. Now we go deeper, because the abilities are not the fear. The abilities are impressive. The abilities are measurable, even if they can't be replicated. The abilities justify a program, justify a budget, justify the recruitment of 100 agents and the months of failed attempts. But the abilities are not why." In that room, the general went silent. The fear, the real, quiet, institutional fear, is what the abilities imply. If you developed pattern recognition of that caliber, that timing, that presence, that metabolic relationship with adversity without their program, what does that mean? It means power does not require their permission, and that is the thing no institution can survive admitting. Think about what every system of authority ultimately rests on: the belief that there is a correct path, a sanctioned process, a way that people must go through, the right schools, the right training, the right credentials, the right connections, the right performance in the right rooms to access real power, real capability, real authority. Every hierarchy is, at its core, a promise. Follow the path, submit to the process, and at the end you will be granted access to the thing you came here for. You never asked for the promise. You never walked the path, and you arrived at the destination anyway. Not by finding a shortcut, not by cheating the system, but by being a kind of person for whom the path was always optional. Because what the path claims to produce, you already were. This does not just threaten the system, it reveals the system. It reveals that the path was never about producing capability. It was about controlling access to capability. It was about ensuring that anyone who possessed real power had also at some point submitted to the authority that gatekept it, had bowed, had asked permission, had made themselves legible to the people in charge of deciding who gets to matter. You never made yourself legible. You never asked. You never submitted. And yet here you are, holding the thing they claim only the path produces. That means the path was never what they said it was. And the people who built their entire identity, their entire career, their entire worldview on the sanctity of the path, they have to look at you and feel the ground shift, because you are proof. Walking, breathing, impossible, undeniable proof that what they've been selling was always optional. But here's the part they don't put in the files. Here's the part that doesn't make it into the behavioral models, or the pattern recognition reports, or the resilience assessments. There was a time when you hid it, not because you were weak, Not because you didn't know what you were, not because you doubted yourself in the deep way, the bone-level way, that the people around you sometimes doubted themselves. You hid it because you understood something about the world that took most people decades to learn. If they ever learned it at all, you understood that your full weight was too much for most spaces. Not metaphorically, literally. You learned young, or maybe not so young. Maybe it took a few hard lessons, a few moments of watching people flinch or freeze or quietly reorganize their behavior around you, that when you operated at full capacity, it changed things. It changed rooms, it changed relationships, it changed people. And sometimes the change they needed most was the change they least wanted to feel. So you learned to moderate. You learned to enter a conversation at 60% and stay there, to have the insight and withhold it, to see what was happening and describe only the surface, to feel the full weight of a moment and present only the polished, manageable, comfortable version of your response. You got very good at it. So good that some people around you genuinely believed that's who you were. The contained version, the edited version, the version that fit inside the rooms they were comfortable with. And here's what you need to hear. Really hear, not just read and move past. You were not hiding your weakness. You were protecting them from your power. There is a fundamental difference between those two things. A difference that changes the entire story of your life up to this point. Weakness hides because it's afraid. Power conceals because it's aware. You were aware. You were aware that some things break in the presence of real intensity, not because the intensity is wrong, but because the thing that breaks wasn't built for it. Crystal shatters when you hit the right frequency. That's not the frequency's failure. You moved through years of your life hitting the world at a frequency you had carefully modulated, carefully reduced, not because you couldn't sustain the real one, but because the world around you couldn't, and you chose, without being asked, to manage that, to carry that weight, to protect the room. Think about how long you did that. Think about the conversations you had at half power, because full power would have ended them. The relationships you maintained by never quite being yourself in them. The rooms you sat in and felt the specific quiet exhaustion of performing a smaller version of yourself for hours. That wasn't weakness. That was an enormous, continuous act of consideration. But there was a morning, or maybe an evening, maybe a moment that doesn't correspond to any particular time of day, when something in you stopped negotiating, not dramatically, not with anger or declaration or any of the external performances that usually accompany a decision, just a quiet interior shift, like tectonic. You were in a situation, some version of the situations you'd been in 100 times before, some room or conversation or dynamic that was demanding you make yourself smaller, and something in you simply didn't. Not because you decided to rebel, not because you had finally had enough of a particular person or circumstance, but because the cost of continuing to contract had finally exceeded the cost of expanding. You had run the numbers without running them. You had assessed the situation at that deep below language level you assess everything, and arrived at a conclusion that the version of you the world had been getting was no longer a gift you were willing to give. And in that moment, quietly, without announcement, you stopped. And what happened next is the part they really couldn't model. Because in the program, in all their attempts to replicate you, to train agents to move the way you move, think the way you think, operate the way you operate, they had assumed that the qualities they were measuring were always present. They didn't understand the concealment. They didn't understand that what they had documented was the modulated version, the 60% version, the version you had chosen, out of consideration for the comfort of the spaces around you to inhabit. So when the agents trained on that profile, they were training on a photograph of a star at partial brightness, not the full thing. When you stopped concealing, the rooms changed again. The people who had been trying to study you, who had been trying to find the fault line, the weakness, the evidence that what they were seeing was constructed rather than essential, found nothing. Because there was nothing. Because the thing you had built over years of operating under pressure, the thing that metabolized adversity, read environments at a non-computational level, changed the energy of rooms just by inhabiting them, that wasn't a performance. It wasn't a role you could break character from. It was structure. It was architecture, to use the general's word. And so the people sent to find the seams found no seams. The investigators became witnesses. The process designed to expose you became a process that documented you. The attempt to find what was fake kept returning the same finding.